So hello and welcome. My name is Steve Pugh. It's Monday, the 28th of November, 2022. What I try and do on the Growth Strategy podcast is introduce you to really interesting people that I think can help your business or career. And Sarat from Hedgehog Lab, who I'm going to introduce you to today, we've actually been connected for a few years, both based in the northeast of England, and I really respect everything that he's done. And part of the beauty of doing something like this is the fact that I get to pick his brains, but also share his story with all of you. So if you join us for the next 40 minutes or so, what we're going to do is go through Sarat's backstory in engineering, starting the business, and go into a lot of stuff like culture as well and why that's important and stuff that he really looks to champion as well. So if you get involved across any of the platforms, we go to LinkedIn Live, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and then it goes on to Google, Spotify, and iTunes and lots of other places as well. If you message in the comments, it should pop up on my screen and I'll bring it in, and I'd love it if you kind of say hello. So Sarat, I'm just going to bring you in. There we go. So you're now live and people can see you and hear you.
Hi, Steve. Great to be here.
No, great. And thank you honestly for your time. I know how busy you are, that it's what I always try and do is deliver value for you as well. But actually, I know that people genuinely respect long form content in a way that, like, I've followed a lot of your stuff for a while, but often in a written post or something that's 200 characters, there's only so much about someone's personality and backstory can you really get into. Is actually getting to hear them just talk. And a lot of people also have this just in the background whilst they're working in their office. So hopefully we'll reach a lot of people as well. So would you be happy to give us a quick intro about who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sarat Pediredla. I am the CEO and co-founder of a business called Hedgehog Lab. Hedgehog Lab is a global digital product studio. We are based in Newcastle upon Tyne. We founded the business in 2007, right here in Newcastle upon Tyne. And the business has grown over the years, across the world to, I think we have like 125 plus people now working for us across the world.
Wow.
Really kind of helping digital businesses, really brands, consumer brands, big enterprise brands, building out digital products from mobile apps to web apps, really.
No, cool. Because I was on your website before and some of your clients are incredible. You know, it's genuine global names. And it's, did you ever imagine that you would get to that point when you first set up?
Obviously, aspirationally, we hope that we would, but frankly, if you'd said to me, certainly in the early years of the business when we were struggling with, really kind of how we're going to grow the business and how we'll even find clients, I think, I don't think I would have imagined that we would have the caliber of clients we've got right now.
No, it's cool. It's cool. And how's your Monday been? I know you mentioned before about how you've done various different podcasts as well, but this is maybe the first live one that you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a lot of pre-recorded podcasts before. I've done a couple of live events, but not live in terms of, obviously live online. I've done a lot of live events, just, physical events, etc. And a lot of my podcasts have been pre-recorded. So I'm really looking forward to this one.
No, I must admit, with because we're both engineers, but also I imagine we're both quite techie. I've always loved technology, cameras, lighting, and lots of different stuff. But it was actually during lockdown, just for the fun of it, I thought I'd learn how to do it. And the irony is that for someone like you or a business like yours, often if you can stay ahead of the competition and learn things that before other people can and get better at them, it's a big advantage. And it was just it's funny having your own business as well. In some ways, it's just a way to spend money on toys that you would never buy yourself as well. But it's quite cool. So can I ask, where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in a place called Hyderabad in southern India,
Hmm.
actually.
Oh, cool. Uh, what was that like?
It was great. I mean, I had a pretty idyllic childhood. Both my parents, my dad used to and still works in insurance, and my mother was a housewife, and I had another young sibling, and it was a great childhood, really. I mean, I reflect on it quite often in terms of, when you talk about your business journey, in terms of the head start you've got in life. And I was talking recently about the privileges I've had in terms of, when you become an entrepreneur, it's very easy to have this caricature sketch of an entrepreneur, the kind of person that is super hardworking, super well, just gets on with it and creates success out of nothing. And I think there are a lot of people that do that. But I think for me, I think, I've had a pretty big leg up in life. Uh, Most importantly, from a great family, that
Oh, wow.
that kind of gave me a really nurturing childhood.
How was Hyderabad? How is Hyderabad different to the UK or different from Newcastle?
I think different in the sense that certainly India is quite I mean the population centers are very very big. Hyderabad, the city was a very crowded city. Although when I was young, when I was growing up there, it wasn't probably as big a city as it is now, because in India population growth is massive. I mean, if you think about, say in the last 10 years, Newcastle might have grown by, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 people. Hyderabad has grown by, something like 50, 60 million people,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
it's a very different base. But but in a lot of ways, I think, it is very similar. I mean, I remember obviously when I grew up there, that was home, and I've been in Newcastle now for something coming close to 20 years, and
Hmm.
this feels like home, and it's a very similar community, very welcoming, very entrepreneurial. In fact, Hyderabad is known as alongside Bangalore in India, as the Silicon Valley of India, really,
Hmm.
in terms of where the tech investment is. And yeah, so, we're similar, but also quite different.
Can I ask, what was your, when you were a child and you were in Hyderabad, what was your opinion of the UK, and did it almost live up to what you thought it would be like when you first moved across?
I had a real privilege when I was growing up, because my primary school that I went to was founded by an Englishman.
Okay.
He was a guy who'd effectively, he was an Englishman. He went to Southeast Asia, and he did a lot of education pieces, training, etc. And I went to a school where the houses were called London, Letchworth, Lincoln, etc. So it was effectively a British school. I had a lot of friends that were British, and in fact, no, I mean, to be honest, I mean, you talk about diversity and culture in the late 80s and early 90s. I went to a school where some of my best friends were Russian, English, Polish, like really
Hmm.
diverse, nationalities, cultures, etc. So particularly in terms of UK, because it was an English school, founded by an Englishman who I really admired. He was a great guy. He was great educated. Um, that was kind of my experience of England, I guess, in the UK before I came here. So I had a pretty good positive opinion of it. Although, my aspiration was never to come to the UK. I came to the UK as a student, and I can talk about that a little bit more. Um, so it wasn't something that I thought about, but it just ended up happening like that.
No, cool. Because I've got friends who are Indian, but I met at university, and you're completely right that the tech scene in Bangalore or in different places is huge. That I've got
Mhm.
ambitions to go over there next year, and it's just what I love now. I hope is that the world feels a smaller place because you can discover different cultures relatively easier than you probably could 30 years ago. And again, with the global war for talent, but likewise, you can have so many really super talented people in India that are probably streets ahead of people you have in the UK and the US. And it's fascinating the way that if you go back 20 years ago, all the money was say in America or the Europe, but actually now the money goes where the talents are, and that the value is in the idea more so than the location, if that makes sense. Now I really kind of respect that. So at what point did you move? Because you went to Southampton, was it?
I did, yeah. I went to Southampton, and I had a pretty interesting journey to Southampton. So it's interesting to go back to that point about talent. One of the things, talking about privilege and growing up, education was a massively important thing in India, and even now it is.
Hmm.
Indian parents, they will sacrifice a lot for their children to get a great education. So this focus on education that my father put from day one was super important, because while I'm not a huge believer in degrees and in getting big PhDs,
Hmm.
etc., education in its most fundamental form, whether it was, diversity, etc., was super important. And so I had this privilege of having a great education. I went to an Ivy, like I said, it was an English school, but it was an Ivy League school. It was a really, really good school. But actually, the consequence of that was there were very high expectations of me because I used to be a brilliant student. Education was my passion. I mean, I was actually one of those weird kids that enjoyed doing their homework rather than I had to be forced to do that. And that actually kind of weaves into my story of coming to Southampton. So when I was very young, I had this real passion to be a doctor. What I wanted to be was to be a neurosurgeon, and I wanted to be a doctor. But but as the years had progressed, and in India, if you want to be a doctor, you've got to do a certain amount of prep. You prepare for your med school, you prepare for
Mhm.
your pre-med, and because of that, you take a certain trajectory of subjects like your A and O levels. So you have to do more biology,
Yeah.
chemistry, etc. And I went down this path where, since I was like, I think 6 or 7, I wanted to be a doctor. Um, and I'd focused my life in terms of becoming that. And as became 14 and 15, and I got into, becoming a doctor, I think the focus was very much around, how am I going to become a doctor? What is my priority going to be? And, I guess, how do I become a neurosurgeon? But while I was doing that, when I was about 15, my dad actually bought me my first computer. And I never actually used computers in my life before. It was something that I was never interested in. Tech wasn't something I really felt passionate about.
Hmm.
Yeah, we had a Nintendo at home, and I used to mess about with it. But really, it wasn't really something. My passion was to be a neurosurgeon, a doctor. And when I got this computer at 15, I just got obsessed with it. I mean, I remember uh, this was just as I was doing my prep for my pre-medical,
Hmm.
school in a couple of years. And then, in 3 months, I taught myself C++. I taught myself programming. I used to stay up until 5 a.m., learning how to build games and all the things that 15-year-old kids do. And so I ended up in this weird situation where all my life I've been preparing and I, pivoted my education and everything to become a doctor. But at the age of 17,
Hmm.
I then decided I don't want to become a doctor, that I really like computers. And what I really wanted to do was a computer science degree. The challenge I had was, growing up in India and obviously, being, being part of this family that had very high educational standards. If I was to do computer science, then my dad said, "Well, you can only do it in, because originally for my doctorate, I was planning to go to Harvard Medical, which is kind of the, like
Yeah.
the typical Indian, thing of if you got to go to Ivy League school, right, and stuff. So obviously, being a doctor wasn't important anymore. Then my dad said, "Well, okay, if you want to do computer science, the only thing you can do is get to MIT or Stanford or one of those big schools." But the problem was MIT needed you to do your maths and your SATs, which basically you had to have maths capabilities to get into computer science, and I didn't have either of those things. So long story short, I wanted to do computer science, but I needed to get into a school or a university that didn't require maths and scholastic aptitude and maths. And so instead of being able to go to America, which
Hmm.
was my original ambition, which is growing up as an Indian kid, most of you go to like a American institute to study or an American university to study. Um, I ended up, and I hate saying that, I ended up settling for the UK because Southampton or Solent University at that time, it was called Southampton
Hmm.
Southampton Institute, didn't have a requirement. They didn't need you to have done a maths A levels or something similar to be able to get into computer science. They said, look, it doesn't matter what your background is, as long as you've got the right aptitude and a good kind of
Hmm.
A level. We didn't have A levels in India, but it was very similar. It was called a +2. You could get in. So I inadvertently landed in Southampton instead of MIT. Really,
Honestly, it's fascinating. And I think a lot of people have dreams and ambitions that when I was doing my A levels, because I'm a basketball player, part of me always wanted to go to America because of the same dream. Because I think part of the media and film and TV, they sell the American dream so well that
yeah.
actually you think, wow, that'd be incredible. But then actually, as you travel a bit more, as you go through life, and I've been to America quite a few times, you can almost see past the facade. And I was in LA 4 months ago, and it's not as pretty as it makes out. And I think often, there will be brilliant places. So I love the UK, but I'm sure India is fantastic as well. But you can always be sold a dream that you think is the best. But actually, I guess fate will always direct you in the right way. But, we're very happy to have you and anyone that wants to come to the UK as well, which is quite cool. So how did you then find the university experience itself? With one thing that I certainly found is that the irony when I was at school, so I went to school in just a normal comprehensive school in Liverpool. The school must have been 99% white, but everyone was from the local area. There was no one from anywhere else. So it was only actually when I went to university, I got to really meet and interact with people from Russia and Poland and India and stuff. But how did you find that transition when you came across?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the transition was easy for me because I went to a primary school where a lot of my friends were, they were Caucasian friends, they were African friends, etc. So, and I think I talk a lot about that defining moment when you're a young person and you're getting to experience all these cultures. And then, when you're a child, even simple things are complicated. Like I remember the first time I ever tried sausages, that was just incredible. My Russian friend, and bacon, and I was like, what, 12 or something. But the point is, I got to experience these diverse cultures, diverse food cultures, diverse. I had a friend whose parents were divorced, and that was not something you ever experienced in India, right?
Okay.
That separation and stuff. So just the diverse thinking, the different way people thought, the different way they. So when I came to UK, I adapted pretty quickly because it felt a bit like home. Because, like I said, going up, a lot of my friends were Caucasian, etc. What I actually found quite interesting though was part of this journey in terms of going into computers was the other thing I wanted to do, other than being a computer engineer or software engineer, was I was really obsessed with being an entrepreneur by then too. I had all these ideas, and
That's cool.
that was the definition of the late '90s, right? In the tech world, people were creating the Amazons, etc. I'm not claiming to be anywhere in the same league as them, but there was this time where the internet was new, everybody was creating something. And actually, I only went to university to pacify my dad because he was obviously upset that I wasn't going to be a neurosurgeon, and he clearly couldn't stomach it. I think being from India, like my entire generational family has always had jobs. They've never really ran a business, so running a business was anathema. So my dad said, "Look, go to university, get a job for a few years, and then if you're comfortable, you can see what you do." So I only really went to university to kind of appease my dad. And what I really found was the university experience, the social experience was really, really good. But the educational experience was really, really dull for me
Okay.
because I remember in the first year I went to do software engineering. I scored 99 out of 100 on my programming course, because a lot of this I taught myself as a 15, 16-year-old.
Okay.
So university felt a bit repetitive because I already learned all this on my own. So the educational experience wasn't great, but the social and and then the bonding experience was really, really important for me.
Yeah, cool. So can you walk us through almost your career after what did you do after university?
Yeah, so like I said, I found university quite dull. I didn't really, I mean, I wasn't a great student in the sense that I was brilliant, I was capable, but I felt totally disengaged. I wouldn't go to lectures, etc. Because, like I said, they'd be teaching things I'd already know, like data structures and algorithms, etc. So I spent a lot of university just hacking and learning things and programming, etc. I did, as an international student, you're allowed to work like 20 hours a week, something like that. So I spent all that time essentially starting my entrepreneurial journey. So I did a bunch of freelancing. Um, I started creating, in the late '90s, because I came to the university, I think in '98, '99. That's when websites were starting to get really like,
I remember.
web development. So I started doing websites for a lot of businesses. down in Southampton to the local business bureau, etc. And I did a bunch of freelancing, and I was really getting passionate about, in 2001, about creating this like online CRM platform. I guess the easiest way I can explain, like Salesforce, right? I had this idea of building this platform, um, and again, I took a typical, what an engineer would do, because I was so obsessed with this idea. When you have this idea and
Mm-hmm.
you sleep and the idea is in your head, and you wake up and the idea is in your head. Um, as soon as I finished university, obviously my parents wanted me to go and get a job, and I was pretty adamant that I was going to go and set up this business. So the first thing I did as soon as I finished university, after I did some freelancing, through university, was I got in those days in 2001, the UK was offering something called the Innovators Visa. So obviously, when you come into the UK as a student, you come here on a visa, right? You don't have a residency permit, etc. And the Innovators Visa was one of the things that the business, I guess it was an entrepreneur's visa in those times. And these were the heady days of 2001, where you needed nothing more than a business plan
Mm-hmm.
and some money in the bank to survive, to get a visa. So I wrote a business plan, which was a great business plan, by the way. Like I said, what was wrong in 2001, trying to build a Salesforce on the web was a great idea. Salesforce was a
Yeah.
budding organization at that time. And by the way, I'm not saying that it was anywhere as good as Salesforce. I'm just giving you an example of the type of CRM I wanted to build. And I got the Innovators Visa. I got like 2 or 3 years to prove my business idea. And I just went at it and started to work on the idea. And the problem I had was I was 21 at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I did what any young 21-year-old engineer does. I got obsessed with the technicalities of the idea,
Got you.
and I built a business around it. I built a great platform, but I didn't do any of the things that mattered to build a great business. There was no product market fit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There was no sales and marketing strategy. And there was just no clear plan around it, so that business failed spectacularly.
But I must admit, for one, it's incredible just to have that drive and ambition to want to do something. So, for instance, I started my first business when I was doing my PhD because I was on a scholarship, but it was no money. And just, I had zero interest in tribology, which is what my thing was. But actually, when you can't sleep and you've got an idea and you can't get out of your head and that's all you care about. And out of interest, do you still feel that way about Hedgehog Lab?
Yeah, I do actually. That's a really good question. I do still feel that way about Hedgehog Lab. I think I spend far too much time thinking about the future. I feel far too much time thinking about where the business can go, etc. But I do, and actually that's been one of my real parameters in life since I've had that first business that failed, and I've had
Mm-hmm.
like literally one main job in between. Is if I don't enjoy it, if I wake up on an average day and I don't feel like this is something I really
Yeah.
enjoy, then I don't think I could do it. You've got to be really passionate about what you do.
No, I've got you. Because I don't know about you, but for me as an engineer, I'm always looking to tweak and improve like everything. Doesn't matter. It could be a sentence on a website. I will look at it and think, does that comma need to be there? And I will do 200 iterations within a 48-hour period, but I'll just tweak and I'll hone. But it's just something that I naturally do. And in with a business, you have that because you can play with all of these different. So should we just dive into Hedgehog Lab? And can you tell us what is it, what do you do, and what's the vision?
Yeah, absolutely. When Hedgehog Lab was formed, the vision was, I guess the purpose was pretty simple. Me and my co-founder used to work in a digital agency in Newcastle, and we saw this focus as a business, as a people business. We were an agency and we were a people business, and there was just, ironically, for a business that was all about people and professional services, there wasn't that much focus on the people. There was just a lot of focus on other things. And so me and Mark had this idea, who's Mark is my co-founder, and we had this idea that what if we just, forget about, this grand vision and ideas of, gathering all the world's information like Google or helping the world connect like Facebook or whatever. What if we had like a very simple theory that what if we created a place that brought in like really talented people, and empowered them to do the best work of their life, whatever that might be. The best work might be creating a CRM, it could be creating um, and funnily, when Hedgehog Lab was formed in 2007, we didn't intend to be an agency business. Actually, we were very, oh, sorry, we were very anti-agency. We didn't want to be in the professional services sector because we've been in the professional services sector before and we didn't have a great experience. So what we really wanted to do was, build a software services, a SaaS platform for the financial services sector. And we really started off the business as a SaaS platform for the financial services sector. But we couldn't have done it at a worse time. We did it just before the run on Northern Rock happened, and it was a terrible time to be anywhere near the financial services sector. So we had to end up pivoting to effectively what we knew best, which was doing professional services. That was not the original intent, but the vision of in terms of the core purpose of the business, the fact that we weren't doing software for the financial services sector didn't really matter, because the core purpose was almost like, what if you built a business that was centered around people and allowed them to do the best work of their life?
No, that's very cool. Because again, that's always half the challenge, is how do you make your business different to everyone else that's out there? And actually, if you fundamentally believe what you do and you've got that, the North Star that you can always go towards, because again, the biggest challenge at the moment is how do you recruit good talent? And likewise, people will they would much prefer to work somewhere that they love to work, even if it's maybe a slightly lower salary or other, but there's huge value in that, because I think people really discovered during COVID that you only need so much money, but kind of life fulfillment and that kind of thing. And actually, just shout out to Jeff saying it is very true that you need to love what you do, because the truth is, we're only on the planet for so long, and you get up every day to chase a dream. That if it's someone else's dream, out of interest, do you feel that you could work for someone else now, or are you too far gone?
No, I mean, it's funny because I did try working for somebody else and I was the worst employee. And I mean, I didn't admit that. In the early years, I thought I was the best employee ever. And I felt quite begrudged that my only one of, I said, the big employer that I worked for didn't appreciate me. But actually, now I reflect on it, being on the other side of the fence and being the boss. And I was a terrible employee. I don't think I could ever work for anybody.
What is it you love about software?
I think, well, software particularly, but technology. I think what I love about software is, the thing that captured my imagination when I started programming at 15 is this intangible, I guess, bits and bytes and, this code that you write can do magical, wondrous things, right? I mean, so the zeros and ones, are enabling me to see you live in your podcast studio. It's enabling, like the power of technology, I mean, and I think we take it for granted if you look at the technological advance in the last, 20 or 30 years. But everything about this podcast that we're doing, including how you're recording it, how you're broadcasting it, how you're going to distribute it, is all being enabled by software. And even in the mid 90s when I started programming, and I was pretty. And part of the reason why, if you remember, being a doctor was my lifelong dream. It was something I had since I was a 6 or 7 year old. And I think that's kind of, gives you the flavor for how important I thought software would be in 95, 96, that I pivoted my entire career, because I always believed that software was going to change the world. And if you think about, all the stuff that happened in the late 90s, 2000s, the Amazons, the Apples, the Salesforce, the Microsofts, etc. And I still think there is so much more to come in this industry. And I think it fundamentally transforms everything we do. Not just business, but everything from the way we the way we meet other people. Right, dating is now online. Everything is software. So that's why I'm hugely passionate about it, and I'm really kind of into it because I believe in the power of it to really change the world, really.
No, that's right. And very true. It's always funny that, 20 years ago, nobody knew how things were going to play out. It's likewise, media studies in the early 2000s, everyone thought was like an easy degree. But now this is media. The world has gone media crazy, that actually my still gut feel is that regardless if you go to university or not, good, talented people will always do well because you can learn and you can change and you can adapt. And at 50, you could learn something new. And it's just, but I love, you're completely right. The fact that we can talk right now, but this gets broadcast around the world. It's incredible, because not long ago, you would have needed an organization like the BBC with satellites and camera crews. And as we're now, anyone from a smartphone can do. So I think you're onto a winner. I think it's cool. Can we talk about culture? I know it's something that's very important to you at Hedgehog Lab. You put a huge emphasis in it, and I believe you're responsible for culture within the business.
That's right. I mean, I call myself the culture custodian. Maybe that's the ego part, but also I think it probably is apt for what I tend to do normally.
So what is it that you believe is important about staff culture? And then also, how do you try and champion that? What do you do to try and make it a great place to work?
Yeah, I think the first thing we did was be very articulate about our purpose. I think if you're not clear on what your purpose is, then I think it becomes really difficult to have any sort of culture. And by the way, I do take a little bit of an issue with this idea that culture is all about the nice things,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I give you a great example. I don't know if you watched the movie Wall Street, with Gordon Gekko,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep.
And he says, money, greed is a good thing, right? And what I love about that is, whether you might disagree with the values of Gordon Gekko and you might disagree with his culture, but what he's got is a very clear value system, and what he's got is a very clear purpose in life, which is about making money and greed. And actually, if you're the kind of person that is attracted to that, you would fit into that, Gordon Gekko system, and so I think often when we talk about culture, I think it's associated as a good thing, right? Because obviously
Mm-hmm.
culture is about being good. But that's not necessarily true. I think culture is about having an identity. Your culture might be, we will work very hard, we will treat you really, really nastily, etc. But you will become a millionaire at the end of this, for example.
Okay.
And that's okay. I mean, it's not for everybody, but it could, that's perfectly reasonable. It's not something that I would ever aspire to, and I wouldn't. You look at what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter right now. It's not something I would aspire to, but there are still hundreds of people wanting to go and work for Elon Musk in a culture that you and me would look at and go, this is just despicable. This is not the kind of organization you want to create. So I think the most important thing in having a culture is having a clear identity, a value system, and a purpose. And one of the things that me and Mark were really proud of is even before we knew we were going to build financial services software, or even before we knew that we were going to do mobile apps or whatever, we were very clear on our culture framework. And our culture framework stems from 5 key things that I kind of stole from, an organizational design company called Novo. And then they had there was a previous version of it. And your culture framework has 5 things. Your purpose. So why do you exist? Why should you exist in this world as an organization? Then you've got your mission and vision. So what is your mission? What are you looking to accomplish? What is the difference you're going to make, to the world and to your customers? Your vision is, what is the kind of world that you see? What kind of world do you want to live in? Is this a vision where software takes over the world, etc.? Then clearly you've got your values. What are the things that you believe in? But more importantly, beyond the values is, what are the behaviors that then enable those values? So if you have those 5 things in a culture framework, which is something that me and Mark wrote down even before, we knew what Hedgehog Lab was and how it would work, then I think we had a bit of a template and a blueprint for how we would run the organization, no matter how many pivots we had to do, whether we had to be an agency I don't know, in 5 years, Hedgehog Lab, I don't know, might be something different. We might be a SaaS platform. I just don't know.
Mhm.
But that culture framework still dictates the kind of people we want to attract, the type of work we want to do, and the type of, obviously, behaviors and values we want to encourage. So that's what culture means to me, really. It's not necessarily just about the good things. I think it's about having a clear identity and saying, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, and these are the kind of things that you will get if you come to this organization.
No, I think it's very cool because a lot of people don't. They just have a generic vanilla. We do this, but then there's no real, because it's how do you articulate why you're different. And what I found really interesting about Elon Musk, it's how in the run up to him taking over Twitter, everyone was really excited. I believe there was a big surge in the stock price. This will be the best thing of all time because someone we know and like from Tesla and SpaceX will go to a platform that we love, which is Twitter, and do good things. And within the space of a week, maybe 2 weeks, he's hated and everyone wants to leave and they want to set up an advertiser's part. But he's the same man. And he's always been very commercial about how he runs his time. And you see it shared online about his framework for efficiency. There's 6 things that he does. But it's funny how you've got to wonder, does he regret now buying it because it's losing him $4 million a day and he's trying to turn it around? And the press talk about it all day, every day, about all these layoffs and how he's the devil. But actually, if he's losing $4 million a day, he has to do something. So it's that balance of, people always judge and criticize, but it's different when it's your head on the block. Have you ever had kind of criticism or anyone kind of challenge what you're doing, or has it always been quite good?
Oh, well, I'm pretty sure. I mean, one of the, I guess, big disadvantages of being the CEO or a co-founder. I mean, more than the CEO or co-founder of a business, it's really difficult for people to challenge you directly, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think there is in both a good and bad way, there is a bit of an enigma, a caricature built of a co-founder, a lot larger than I. And obviously, I have to play the part to a certain extent because that is my job, right? Because ultimately, when people look up and they look around and they go like, who's in charge here? Somebody has to be in charge. It can't just be everybody for themselves. So I think in the early years, definitely direct criticism of people disagreeing with me was really, really challenging. Don't get me wrong, people, and I think as time has gone, it's very clear people behind my back and certainly have disagreed with me or criticized me. But what I've really tried to work over the last few years is really encouraging that criticism to be more direct in terms of what I do. And the reality is, a bit like, and I'm not saying there's any parallels or anything similar, but in example to in a similar way to the point you made about Musk is, if you're doing anything of any importance to whether it's to you or a bunch of people, you're not going to please everybody all of the time. And actually, if you are, then you're actually not doing something right. And in fact, I would argue that the times I was liked most in this organization universally were times when the organization was performing horribly. Our numbers weren't great, we were losing money, etc. But the culture was great. You see what I mean? And actually, some of the times that where I've been criticized and where where people have disagreed with me, have been times when I've had to make difficult decisions that have actually improve things for everybody, good financial numbers, better culture, etc. But it's not something everybody agrees with because, as a great example, if you say, look, we're going to have low tolerance for, say, people who are, A players, but are a bit of an asshole, if you excuse my French, then that's clearly going to piss off people who think they're A players, but a bit of assholes, So the reality is, so criticism, I think, is actually a good thing in a business like mine, because it means you're doing something important that people care passionately about. Obviously, if I'm being criticized all the time, then I'm doing something terribly wrong. But you can't please all the people all of the time, and I think that's been a real big maturity for me because growing up in an Indian household where it was very important perception was as important as reality. It was all about how your community, how your peers, how your friends, how your family perceived you. Um, I spent a lot of time in the earliest hedgehog lab trying to be liked.
Yeah.
And actually, what I realized as I evolved through my journey is that it's more important to be respected than liked. Actually, I'm not, it's not all about making friends. It's about making the right decisions. That means, you've got a sustainable, profitable, growing business where people are looked after, they're paid well, and have opportunities for growth in doing all the interesting things that you expect from a job.
How do you think your parents feel now about your journey and where you're at? Looking back to when you were 21, 22 and you wanted to start a business, what would they think
Yeah.
now?
They have. Thankfully now they've told me they're proud of me. But I think, obviously, for them, my dad. I remember a few years ago he said to me, he didn't think I would last. He didn't. He thought it was one of those things. You're a young person. You got to get it out of your system. Do your business thing. I'm sure when it all goes, totally wrong, you get back to a decent, stable job, and that's how it will be. Um, but I think he's seen the journey I've been on. It's not been the smoothest. I think there's been lots of ups, but lots of downs too.
Mm-hmm.
More downs than not in the early years. And I think he definitely, my father particularly, I think who's really skeptical about anything business oriented. I think can see that I've kind of I guess I've kind of made it. Yeah, I remember, one of the best signs that an Indian parent can say to you is, when they say to you, I don't worry about you anymore. That's actually a good thing because there's this paternal instinct of, you have to look after your children until they're 60 or 70 years old. And so, my father said that to me a few years ago, which I think is probably the best thing a helicopter Indian parent can say to you.
No, wow, that's awesome. What's the dream for the future? If you were to fast forward 5-10 years, what's best case?
For me, obviously, from an organization perspective, we want to continue implementing that, that purpose. But our vision certainly is to be, the current kind of vision for us is to be the most respected digital product, studio in the world. And I think, one of the things that we'd love to be doing, because, we're starting to get there. And, you talked about we have some great clients. But if I was completely candid, are we building products that, that are impacting millions of people all the time?
Yeah, okay.
Probably not. Probably not. You want to be the person that builds the next, as an example, that build the next iPhone. You want to be the person that build. And so the dream for the next 5 to 10 years is, certainly the big, hairy audacious goal for us is to really create digital products and technology that is impacting millions of people. We're on that journey. We launched something last year for a financial services customer that is going to touch millions of people. We're working this year with an insurance customer where, I think it'll touch something like 6 million people.
Wow.
So it's about making impact on that scale with our technology, which is really, really important for us. Obviously, that also means, conversely, to be able to make that impact, we need to be a bigger organization. We need to be, much larger, much more profitable, etc. Because with scale and size in this industry gives you the opportunity to do that impactful work. Launch a new bank, launch a new, technology business, etc. So the dream is to continue doing what we're doing and be really good at it, become much more global. Our current focus is very much Western Europe and America. I think there's a lot more opportunity, certainly with the way digital transformation is happening in Asia. Asia is the next frontier in terms of where digital transformation is, and maybe in 5 to 10 years, we'll have the scale and the capacity to do work across the globe. Really.
Have you ever been tempted to launch your own app or service that you could develop in house, but almost create your own, unique hero product?
It's been very tempting, and I think a lot of professional services businesses, not lots, certainly at our scale, it's the dream, isn't it? Why do paid for work for customers when you could just launch a product, go to bed and the cash register keeps ringing. But the reality is it's very difficult for a professional service, because our business is optimized to do two things really. The first thing is to serve clients all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing, being candid, is to extract every single penny of revenue from the time that people have got available. So if we don't invest that time, say, for example, in doing client work and generating revenue,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you need to develop your own product, then actually it's a distraction. And it's funny because one of the core values of Hedgehog Lab is about remaining focused. We want to have an ultra,
Mm-hmm.
laser focus. And we don't think creating products gives us the same focus as what we need to do right now, which is serving customers. And we want to build an economic engine, a business that is running almost like a well-oiled machine all around the professional services sector. So yes, I've thought about it lots of times. I've been pitched loads of ideas from my team. And I'm sure both ex and current team members, to their frustration, when I say, I think it's a great idea, but we're not going to do it. But I think, it's just lacks focus for us.
No, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this conversation is that I speak to a lot of people, but just talking to someone that does have, and it's clear that you have a laser focus, exactly what you're aiming towards. No scatter, no, because a lot of people, they just go on this journey, they've got their eyes closed and they kind of know they want to go that way, but they don't have the focus, and it rarely comes across just in everything you're talking about. And actually, I really enjoy when you talk about culture, that you don't have to be liked, if that makes sense. I think often, there's so many different ways to run a business, and actually, if you want to genuinely create the biggest economic machine you can, there are certain rules and things that you should do. And, you speak to loads of people where they find themselves wandering in the dark and chasing all these blind alleys, but they don't get anywhere because they're just walking around in a circle. So actually, it's quite inspiring to actually hear someone that knows exactly what you want to do, how you want to do it, and then you get to execute on that plan. Can we talk about mentoring for a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So
sure.
You were a mentor on the BT Ethically Diverse Mentorship Program. Why do you feel that mentorship as a whole is important?
Yeah, and I think it's been a real journey for me, because one of the biggest mistakes I made, as a young entrepreneur, because I was given advice to go and find mentors, and I was a bit, as I said, I was a terrible employee, but I was a little bit of I was a bit of an arrogant young man, really. That was, and I guess some young entrepreneurs are, and actually you have to be a bit arrogant and a bit crazy to be able to, when you've got no savings, you've got a mortgage, etc. I mean, to just quit your job, with nothing behind you to try and set up a business. So you got to be a bit, a bit arrogant. But I was very arrogant, and I was given a lot of advice around, look, go and find some mentors, etc. And I just didn't feel like I needed mentors. I just felt like, well, I mean, I'm quite capable. I'm a smart person. Like I said, I taught myself programming. I taught myself how to kind of set up and run a business. Like, why do I need anybody else's help? And this was when I was 25, 26. And actually, 10 years later, I actually realized that, and actually having been practically on that journey and really kind of learning through the school of hard knocks and all the mistakes I've made, and reflected back on all the times when actually a mentor could have really helped me sense check and, and talk through that. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been seeking mentorship from everybody, from peers, from colleagues, etc. And that's really kind of evolved into real appreciation for mentorship. And so part of it is almost like trying to give back the thing I didn't take, because, obviously when I was young, I was quite arrogant, etc. So, over the last decade or so, I've learned practically how important mentorship will be, to anybody, who's trying to get into the space and understand what they're trying to do. So my first-hand experiences really mattered to me. But the second thing that mattered to me was, over the last 5 years, as I then started dealing with mentors, you could really see the difference some of these people can make in your life. I remember, I think particularly in the pandemic, uh, you know, I went through, we had a really difficult year in the pandemic, and I went through a really, really dark place. And, we talk about loving your job, and, eh, I wasn't sure I loved my job at that time. It was a
Hmm.
really dark place. I felt quite isolated. I felt, I mean, I guess most people did in the pandemic. I guess we're all stuck in our houses, but more than ever, because I'm not outgoing, but you can see I'm quite like, I've got energy. I'm quite an energetic person. And I just felt all of that sap through in the pandemic. And if not for one of the mentors I was working with, who really got me to kind of fall back in love with what I was doing, have perspective, etc. And that really changed. And actually, I've only been on my mentoring journey for the last year and a half. And I just really saw the power, because you almost like I went to that brink of, I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm just going to quit, to actually, really enjoying what I'm doing, driving the business, all these 20 different ideas, etc. Now, obviously, some of this was coaching, and I know there's a little bit of a blurred line between
Yeah.
mentoring and coaching. And I saw the real power of that in the pandemic, in that, and I'm not talking about, this person wasn't like a, psychotherapist or anything like that. I'm not talking about therapy, but really just the mentoring side combined with everything else, all the support I've got. And I think, I just saw the power of that, and I felt like that's something I can give back to somebody who's in that same position, somebody who's starting and doesn't know how to do sales and marketing in the agency sector,
Great.
somebody who's, trying to do a tech startup but doesn't really know how to do fundraising. These are things I've been through, and, can provide a template for. So yeah, giving back was really important. And obviously giving back on, really important programs like the Ethically Diverse Leadership Program, means so much more
Hmm.
than just doing it to somebody I know or something like that.
No, I think it's cool because I must say, if I'm 100% honest, I don't have I do have mentors, but I get my mentorship from books and from literature and from people, because my big thing is that I love people that have been there and done it. So you, because you've
Mm.
lived the life, you've done 20 years, Hedgehog Lab is 15 years old now. But I really respect anyone that's been there, got the scars, and they've been through it. You do
Mm.
also have people online that sell coaching, but they've done a course, but they haven't lived it. And for me, I class it as my bullshit meter, but it's almost where, for me, I know who I gravitate towards. But actually, because of the ambitions that I have, there aren't many people in England that have done that level of stuff. So I try and just take inspiration. But I do genuinely want to just learn and get ideas from everywhere. And when we mentioned before about how being criticized, there's a guy called Ray Dalio that is one of the world's richest men. But they have something called radical transparency,
Yeah.
where they encourage the criticism. And actually, one of my clients now, there's something that someone's doing that I'm not sure about. I should have been on the phone today to do that, if that makes sense. But the point is, the end goal, if you're, as a leader, you genuinely want to get to the end or the target or your big, hairy, audacious goal, challenge is okay, because actually, what if they're right? And it will help you get there. And it's funny that one of my clients says to me that, Steve, I pay you for your advice, even if I don't want to hear it. And I think it's so true. But in many ways, I still fall into that character that you described, where I actually want the mentorship. I'm just very selective about who it is,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And I think there's nothing wrong in being selective. And I totally
Mhm.
agree. I think, there are a lot of career coaches and mentors who've done a course on something and suddenly,
Mhm.
think that they can do it all. And I certainly think I agree. And I think both of the, I have this idea of a personal advisory board that
Mhm.
I'm just refreshing right now. And I don't necessarily mind the diversity of it. I've got a friend on it right now who isn't essentially more experienced than me, but she brings a very different perspective
Yeah.
to how I handle my work than, say, somebody who's been in that same,
Okay.
boat, etc. But ultimately, it's got to be people you respect for their diverse opinions rather than, people because they qualified, which I think is a very different dynamic.
No, cool. I am conscious of time because I know how busy you are. So I have two questions to kind of finish up. What's the best piece of advice you ever had?
That's a really tough question because I've had so much good advice through my life. But probably, I mean, probably one of the best ones because it panned out well for me was before I started my business, and I was speaking to a few people. And one of the best piece of advice I had was if you want to, if you're looking through going through the business, the business journey, I was told to find a co-founder because, and I remember when I was told that, because remember I was an arrogant young man, and I thought, why do I need a co-founder? And I remember a couple of people I was speaking to and said, trust me, like you will need a co-founder. And actually, having been through that journey, I think I couldn't have got better advice, and you need a whole podcast to explain why a co-founder is great to start a business with. But, suffice to say, there were, similarly to the point I made earlier, there were some really dark days where I think this business would have just folded in the space of, 48 hours if we didn't have each other to bounce off. So probably one of the best pieces of advice I got. And like I said, it was counterintuitive to me because I'm kind of a bit of a lone wolf. I just like to go on by myself and do my own thing. And I think, that advice I got, which was, if you're going to start a business, do it with a co-founder, was probably the best advice I got.
I will save the question for another podcast then, because I chose to do it myself, but it's because I'm a pain in the arse and I know exactly what I want. I'm genuinely, but I'm in the right way, really interested, because it's that kind of thing. For where I am now, I might be fine as I am, but actually, if you want to create the next $1 billion startup, you might need a team. So I'm with you. And last but not least, if you were to give advice to your younger self, and it could be you at school, it could be you at 15, 16 when you started to play with computers, or even then when you come to actually go to university, etc. If you were to give advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I think one of the best piece of advice I'd give to my younger self is certainly reading and books. Books. Funny, when I was really young, books were something I was obsessed with. And then when I got older, in the last kind of 6 or 7 years, books have been something I've come back to. And it's interesting, you said books were some of your best mentors. I probably regret not reading as much books all the way from after university, because you can imagine as a young entrepreneur, when I was founding a business and I was in the, life of work, and as a young parent, I just, I always found excuses for not reading books. I was kind of, I've got other things to do. I've got a job, I've got a family, I've got a kid, etc. And actually, I regret that. So I think that if I was back to 15 or 16, I'd be like, read a book every week at least, or read something every week, because I think all the growth and advancement I've seen in the last 10 years, I probably missed out in my 20s because I was too busy doing other things.
No, cool. Honestly, thank you so much for your time today. I think in some ways, this conversation, because it gets saved on YouTube and Spotify and stuff, it's like a mentorship session, because people will look up to what you've done, but there will be people that consume this content. It could be in 10 years' time, but they will continue to get value from your journey, and you will touch people's lives that you might never even meet. But the point is, you will still be able to help more people than you probably think you have. So no, thank you for your time. Keep up the great work. I genuinely do kind of appreciate it, and hopefully I will see you around northeast of England at some point soon.
Absolutely. Hope to meet up soon for a coffee.
No worries. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye.
You too. Have a great day. Bye. Bye.